Clock is a minute fast. Ruchem Aboim B'Shem Hashem. Shem Yirgin Shirter. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's shir from Rabbi Yakov Zev Smith Shlita on Nikri Habayis v'Shabbos v'Yomtov, cleaning a home on Shabbos. I have the great schus of sponsoring a shir. Call Yirgin Shirter at 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. Rabbi Smith.
The other week we woke up to a lot of snow on Shabbos morning, and the question was, are you allowed to shovel the snow? In a situation when you're within an area, there's no problem of carrying. He said, mutter for a yid or a guy to shovel snow on Shabbos. Then we had a shayla that was deceivingly simple, but the question about washing the floor, mopping the floor, having the guy do it, whether it's at home or in a public area, in a yeshiva, in a hotel, you have a catering hall, the mashal that there's a big rain Friday night and the floor is muddy or there's dirt from slush, from snow. In which situations is it mutter to wash a floor on Shabbos or Yomtov? And then we had an interesting ha'ara. Someone asked about washing the countertop. There was a very nasty stain. He wanted to clean it off, and someone told him, Epis, you're not allowed to wash the countertop as well. So these and many other questions will be the focus of today, which is really the sugya of keeping a home clean on Shabbos and Yomtov. And basically, as our derech always is, even though it seems to be a variety of different questions, sweeping, mopping, countertops, is really one yesod that we have to really clarify. The Mishnah in the Akdama to our Siman Shin Lamed Zayin, really based on a Gemara in Shabbos Ayin Gimel, but to make it practical, the malacha of chayrish is not only someone on a tractor that's plowing the field. As the Mishnah says, quoting a Gemara, any type of improvement to the ground, leveling the ground, making it straight, which is really a prelude for chayrish. Leveling ground is the malach of chayrish on Shabbos. Now, how about if I level the ground, I flatten the ground in my own home? Let's say I'm living a long time ago, or I'm living in the Chafetz Chaim's house. They say that he still had an earthen floor, no covering. So what's wrong with leveling the ground in my house? I'm not going to plant in my house. So the Mishnah says, based on the Gemara in Shabbos, Ayin Gimel Amid Beis, that's still the Issa of Boina, because you're improving your house, and the karka, the ground, is part of your house. So leveling a ground, either it's outdoors, it's chayrish, or indoors, it's baina. And for example, which I think we all know, it's a big sugya in Shas, in Shabbos Chav Beis, and Shulchan Aruch, and our Sim in Shin Lamed Zayin, dragging a heavy bench outdoors, if it's a psik reisha, if inevitably it will cause a furrow to be formed, you'll make a charitz. That's also on Shabbos. What's wrong? What's wrong with making a furrow on the ground? That's chayrish, of course. That's the mamash, the malacha of chayrish. Now you're wondering, what does shaykh does this have to sweeping on Tavshin Pei Beis? We all have floors of any type, but no one has earthen floors. So let's learn a Gemara. Shabbos Tzadikei, HaMechabed. Now the word Mechabed or Kibud, we immediately think about Mesidah Kedushin or Sandikois. Kibud, Mechabed is sweeping. I guess that's the real Kibud. You sweep your house, Shabbos, or Erev Shabbos, or Shalom Bayis, both of them are okay. That's Kibud. Kibud is sweeping. HaMechabed, if someone sweeps, or Vamerabed, we'll soon see he pours water on the ground. So the one sheet is chayiv chatas, but we definitely hold that there's an issa of sweeping or sprinkling water on the ground. Now, agav, I'll mention this once and for all. The Gemara talks about Shabbos and Yomtov. In other words, today's sugya, even though we always mention Shabbos because most of our year is Shabbos, but the sugya today applies equally to Yomtov like Shabbos. So today's sugya, beside the 52 Shabbos of the year, is also the 12 days of Yomtov. So here the Gemara says that sweeping or being merabates, pouring water on the ground, which levels the ground, is asa on Shabbos or Yomtov. The question is, I'm sweeping my house. And assuming I live in the olden days that I have an earthen floor, but what's wrong with sweeping in my house? So Rashi says, Mishum boina. Oh, now we understand what that means. We said earlier, leveling the ground, improving the ground in a house is boina. But a little more mefurish, Rashi and Shabbos, Kuf Chav Dalet Amid Beis, the Asa Mishum Ashvi Gumais, the Maider Abshimon Psikreish V'lo Yamas. Now this is very important. Because had it been that sweeping doesn't necessarily level the ground, had it been just an Eina Mischaven, it might be Mutai Abshimon. But Rashi is telling us the fact that sweeping a ground is certainly leveling it, and it makes it a psikreisha of boina on Shabbos. Okay, Eilas Tamid will soon see, says it's karvel psikreisha, but that's bad enough. So now we see sweeping an earthen floor is as bad as schlepping a heavy bench. They're both psikreisha of malacha deraisa. Now, lamaisa, I just should mention that this Rashi is the reason of most Rishonim. There are other reasons why sweeping is asa. The Mordechai in Masechta Shabbos says, when you're sweeping, inevitably you're moving muktzah, whether it's the dirt that you're moving, or the dirt of the floor, whatever it is, chicken bones, whatever fell on the floor. So he feels that sweeping is a problem of muktzah. The Smag and Simon Samachei has a little different of a reading. He says, if you're sweeping the floor, you're involved in making the floor nice, you might end up smoothing the kavanah the floor or repairing a hole in the ground. The Or Zarua says it might bring to Chayfa. If you want to see more in detail, you look in the Shvisa Shabbos Chayrish Tezvav. He has 9 reasons why it's asa to sweep a floor on Shabbos. Now this is all wonderful. The question is, what does it have to do with us and Tafshin Pei Beis that no one has dirt floors? So here's the big question. Can we say if the reason no longer applies, then ignore Takanas Chazal? Or Chas V'Shalom? Since when do we do that? We don't permit taking pain relief on Shabbos today because we don't grind medicine. We don't change Takanas Chazal. If it doesn't apply, so we still keep it. So the question is, can we say since today there is no problem of Mash V'Gumais because there's no floors of earth. Maybe there's no Issa. So we have to learn a second Gemara. It's on same daf, Tzadik Hey. The Gemara says that a Meimar poured water on the floor in Mechuzah. So they asked him, that's the Issa of Asal Rabbi. That's mamish the Issa the Gemara said before you're not allowed to do. So he says, what's the reason you're not allowed to do it? Dilma Asvil Ashvuye Gomais, Hacha Leka Gumais. A Meimar says, I'm not worried because where I am, there's no problem of Gumais. Why? Obviously, they had either tile floor, maybe they had a shayish, a marble. So it's a pliya. Because you don't have a problem, you ignore Takanas Chazal. So Rashi explains, Ritzbas Avanam, he had a stone floor, B'chol Ha'ir. Apparently, the city Mechuzah was an upscale city, and they didn't have dirt floors. They all had marble or stone floors. Now it still needs a hezbah because you don't have a problem. How do you ignore Takanas Chazal? But let's move on. There's a second Gemara, besides Daf Tzadik Hey, has 2 parts to it. The second Gemara is Shabbos Kuf Nun Aleph Amud Beis. The Gemara says Rabbi Meir, the Heilig Tana Rabbi Meir, went to the Merchatz on Shabbos, and this was before they acid going to a Merchatz on Shabbos. And his Talmidim, out covered Atar, wanted to wash the floor where he was going to be. So he says, you're not allowed to wash the floor on Shabbos. So he says, Rebbe, but the floor in the Merchatz was not earth. It was a stone floor, whatever it is, but it wasn't the problem of earth. So he says, aren't you worried about karka b'karka michlafa? Of course in the Merchatz there's no earthen floor, but the rest of the homes are. How could you wash the floor? And he refused to allow them to wash the floor for him. Now we're confused. Tzadik Hey, the Gemara says in Shabbos, you're allowed to wash the floor if it's not dirt, if it has a avonim. And in Daf Kuf Nun Aleph, you're not allowed to wash the merchet. What's the chilik? So we need a kosav ashlishi, a third Gemara, that's Shabbos Chav Testament Beis, where the Gemara tells an incredible story. Think about it. There was this certain person schlepped a heavy bench in his dining room that had a marble floor, not an earthen floor. Now, you could schlep a bench from today till tomorrow, you're not going to make a charitz on a marble floor. But they told him, but you have to make a gzeira, marble floor or to earthen floor. So you can't schlep a heavy bench in your dining room, even though it's a marble floor. So this, we see that you can't say, well, I'm different than everybody else, which we understand. But how do we understand Ameimar allowed the rinsing in mechuzah? So Tosfos on this Gemara says the pshat is based on Rashi by Daf Tzadikei. Listen to the beautiful Einfeld. Zok Tosfos, if you recall, Ameimar didn't say my floor was different. Ameimar said the whole city mechuzah, nobody had dirt floors. We all had either marble or stone floors. So therefore Tosfos says that if the entire city has no dirt floors, it's mutter. But if just yechidim, then it's taka asa, because the gzeira doesn't change. So this is a beautiful insight. In other words, the general attitude is you can't ignore takanas chazal because you have a different situation. Apparently, if the whole city doesn't have that concern, so they're mufka from the gzeira. But lest you think that we just take takanas chazal lightly, listen to a fourth Gemara, and that's Psachim Samach Dal, and that's the culmination of our introduction. In Psachim Samach Dal, the Mishnah describes the incredible, avodah of Erev Pesach when they shachted karbonis, the Karban Pesach, and the Gemara explains there was blood in the floor of the Beis Hamikdash up to their knees, and the Kehanim, and I quote, they madichen es hazara shaloi b'ritzayin chachamim. They washed the floor in the Beis Hamikdash against the will of the Rabbanim. Even though it was in the Beis Hamikdash, there was a marble floor, but they violated the halacha. Now the question is, what was wrong? A marble floor, there's no chashash of mash v'gumais. The teretz is other floors were not marbled. So you can't do something mutter here if everybody else is asa. But the point is, we see from here something incredible. Because you have to realize, and I must make this point, we talk about washing the floors, we immediately think about a map. We'll soon see a map involves multiple isurim. First of all, you put water on the map, so that's libun, you're cleaning it. Then you wring it out. Then when you map the floor, so schita from the map to the floor. Then when you wring out the map again, afterwards, weiter schita. Maps involve Isurei Torah. The way they washed the floor in those days, I didn't find any place that said they washed it with a map. The way they did it, we do it today again in some places, in Eretz Yisrael especially. They splash water on the floor, and then they pushed with a sort of like they call it a sponger or whatever, a plastic device that pushes the water. There's no schit in that. It's just washing the floor. And the truth is, that's what they did in the Beis Hamikdash. They put water, they opened up the water to come out, then the water ran, and then the water was drained. But there was no schita. So what's wrong with washing a floor? The teretz is, if you put water on an earthen floor, that settles the ground. So washing even on a shayish floor is awesome. So it's mavel harayin. The blood was up to their knees. It was a real mess. But you can't violate a takanas chazal. We have to not only keep Shabbos, we have to be shoyim Shabbos. Gezeres chazal protect any concern of chilul Shabbos. So here we see the extent of takanas chazal in the Beis Hamikdash when presumably there was a need, but it wasn't enough of a need. And the Gemara says, I ain't supposed to be Mikdash, but it's not enough of a need. So now let's learn the Shulchan Aruch, and we'll savor the flavor, like we like to say, how the Mechaber took all this and put it into a few halachos. Shin Lamed Zayin Aleph, the Mechaber says that if you drag a bench, and it's not a heavy bench, and it's not a psik reish that you're going to make an indentation, a charitz, it's mutter. That's pashit, because Davish and Meschaven is mutter. The Sharatzian discusses why it's mutter to schlep a heavy bench in your dining room. Now, till today we might say, what's the problem in the dining room? But then again, there is a problem. If the city is not all floored, it's a problem. But today it's mutter to schlep a bench in a home. The Shulchan Aruch adds in the end of Sif Aleph, Mutter l'Rabbeitz habayis. And the Mishnah Berurah is quick to add, the Gemara says, you're not allowed to pour water on the floor. So the Mishnah Berurah explains, we're only talking about a case that it's not a psikration that you're going to settle the ground. I guess not too much water. I saw the Shmir Shabbos points out something that I guess the younger boys don't know what we're talking about, but anybody our age remembers this. Before Simchas Torah, a good gabber would pour water on the floor on the Beis Medrash. Why? Because otherwise, by dancing, all the dust would settle. Now, but imagine if you have a kafais on dirt, on earthen floor. There would be dust. So the Shmir Shabbos in Chav Gimel Hey, he says that's what the Mechaber could be talking about. To pour water on the earth when it's not a psik reisha, and you're doing it to keep the dust from settling, from rising, that would be mutter if it's not a psik reisha. But of course, to pour water on the ground when it's a psik reisha is the issa midrabanan of asel rabbits. Now, Siv Beis is our inyan. And the Mechaber begins emphatically, asel lechabed habayis. You're not allowed to sweep a floor on Shabbos or Yomtov. Ela imkein merutziv, only if the floor is some type of a covering. V'yesh matirim afilu einai merutzav. Now, this is a big chiddush, because here the Shulchan Aruch quotes an opinion that you're allowed to sweep even if it's not merutzav. Now, where's that coming from? So let's go slow. Why is it also to sweep? Says the Mishnah Berurah. Because it's a psik reisha, you're going to be mashva gumois. And the Sharatzian mentions the other reasons. Maybe it's muktzah, you're moving muktzah. Maybe you might come to, he quotes the Arzarua. Again, 9 reasons why you're not allowed to sweep a floor, an earthen floor on Shabbos or Yomtov. That's the Mechaber's sheet. Then the Mechaber says, yesh matirim, but if the floor is merutzev, if you have a covering on your floor, it's mutter. Now, where's that? Why is that so? So obviously, this is based on a Rambam in Chaf Aleph Gimel, where the Rambam permits if your floor is tiled or covered. Because once by you there's no chashash, you don't have to worry what's doing in the rest of the city. Now, where's this coming from? So let me tell you. The Shulchan Aruch quotes the next sheet, Yesh matir afilu einim merutzev. You're allowed to even sweep a dirt floor? That's Keneged the Gemara. But this is based on Tosfos Tzadikei quoting a Bahag, who makes a very interesting point. Who said sweeping is a psik reisha? The Gemara says that Rab Shimon is moida, by psik reisha it's awesome. But let's say it's not a psik reisha, then according to Rab Shimon is mutter. And if you learn the Gemara, it might be that the Gemara that asks sweeping is because even though it's not a psik reisha, but Einim Mischaven is asa. But like Rab Shimon, we paskin that Einim Mischaven is mutter, it's only psik reisha that's asa. So the Bahag holds sweeping the floor when it's not a psik reisha is mutter l'chatchila. Now, so I don't know what the Metzias was in every dirt floor. If it wasn't a psik reisha, the Bahag held it's mutter. Now it seems a little bit to machlekes in the Metzias, but the Mechaber says no. You can't rely on the Bahag. We reject the Bahag. But it's the Beis Yosef, but we can make sort of a compromise. Once your floor is merutziv, so you're not going to come to a problem. Other floors are not, but we could rely b'shas achak on the Bahag that it's mutin ganzen. So this I want to make a point. For Svardim, you should know the Mechaber Shita is, even if the whole city is not merutziv, it's regular dirt floors. If your house is merutziv, and that's the meaning of Svardim Adar I, they have this cooler, they could sweep the floor. However, the Torah quotes the Rosh and Chav Beis Tezvav and the Chuvas, very strongly worded lashon with an eidlikkeit. He says people sweep the floor. I would be moicha, but they won't listen. And why should I make them mazidim? That was the Rosh's understanding. That's how much the Rosh rejected the heter to be makel when the floor is merutziv. Even if it's merutziv, you can't be makel keneged the Gemara. In other words, he doesn't accept the Bahag, and he doesn't even accept the sheet of the Rambam. And that's why the Darkei Moshe and the Ramah by us says that the minig is we don't sweep any floor, even if the floor is merutziv. So like the Ramah, it seems to be that there's no heter to sweep floors b'zman hazeh, because he says you can't sweep even merutzif. But we could add, but let's say the entire city is merutzif. That we saw Gemara. That's Amema. And Taka the Bialacha is quick to add. I'm not sure why the Ramah doesn't mention the Beferish, but Bialacha is quick to add. If the entire city is merutzif, you're allowed to sweep even according to the Ramah. So let's chazer over that basically a dirt floor is still also the same issa. We'll soon see many examples. A floor that's tiled or any type of covering, if only this floor is tiled, for the minig Ashkenaz it's still awesome, for Sfardim is mutter. Now let's apply this lamais. So again, sweeping the house today is mutter pashtus, no suffix. I'll tell you an interesting ha'ara, a shayla, but even though it's not negated to me or you, but it brings us to the beauty of the sugya, how every question has to be analyzed properly. They asked Rav Ozna about soldiers, I guess former soldiers that are on duty and they don't have hotels, they stay in tents. They sleep tachas kippus shemayim with a tent on top of them. But the mamish living on the ground. The one place that they have a floor is in the dining room area where they eat, because they have to clean it. So they asked Rav Ozna, could they sweep the tents? And if not, can they sweep at least the dining room area that has a floor on it? So how would you respond to that question? So Rav Ozna said, well, since Roiv of the place where they are, they're not in the city, they're outdoors. So even in the kitchen area, they can't sweep, because it's a city that's Roiv, that's not Merutzah. But then he says, he doesn't add this, but achar it's pashit, that taka for Svardim, it's mutter to sweep in the kitchen. Because once this floor is Merutzah, so for the Mechaber sheet is mutter. So that's basically the Yisod. In other words, this Chiddush is, which is not a Chiddush, you don't look at the whole Eretz Yisrael as one. You look at a city, and then they're not in the city, they're out of the city. They're in the mountains. That taka is Einim Merutzah. Now, sweeping our homes are mutter. How about sweeping our driveways? Which is, for those that are listening and don't know what city life is all about, we have a little concreted area in between house and another house. So the truth is, all the Paiskim say, you don't look at the whole New York City as one. You look at the homes as one group, and the outdoors as another group. So in the city, we could say Roiva here, if not probably the overwhelming majority of the city, is Merutzif. The streets, the sidewalks, okay, people still have a little greenery in their backyard, in the lawn, but basically the city, not only the homes, but the Roiva here is Merutzif. So you're allowed to sweep the streets, or the sidewalk, the driveway. If a person has a sukkah on the driveway, that's okay. Now, we'll soon see suburban life. People live in Muncie where there's more land out there. And besides that, even not all areas are merutziv. That's more chum. We'll get back to that in a moment. But let's talk about someone who lives in a city and he has a backyard and he likes to see the Rabbi Shlam's world. He didn't concrete his backyard. It's still the original karka the Rabbi Shlam made in the time of the Teishes Me'abreshis. So there's no doubt about it. If he's outside and he wants to sweep up that ground, that's an Issa D'Rabbanan. That's Mamash Awas Sugya. The fact that all the homes are Merutziv doesn't affect dirt. Dirt is dirt. That's possible. Now, let's say he has a backyard, all ground, all earth. He decides to build, he's on the ground floor, he builds a deck, a patio, whatever you call it, but it's level with his house. It's built like, just a little bit above the ground. Could he sweep that patio, that deck? He eats outside, maybe it's a sukkah, he builds a sukkah there. So this is interesting, because the house is mutter. The outside, the yard is asa because it's karka. But this deck is built on the yard, but it's part of the house. So I saw the Chut Shanim, this in Karel, it's an Amad Tzadik Vav. He says, Tzarachian, how do you look at this deck? Is it part of the outside? Outside is asa. It's all Einem Merutzim. Who said it's part of the house? It's built out of the house. But the Shmir HaShabbos in Chav Gimel Yud says what he thinks that this is Pashit, that this is considered an extension of the house, even though it's built above Issa area, because the yard is Asa, but it's like an extension of the house, and you're allowed to sweep this deck, this porch. But I want to make a point. If we would be able to say that the porch, that this deck is like the outdoors, it would be asa even though the deck is a wooden floor. Because don't forget, it's like roiv of the outdoors is ein merutzav, at least in his backyard. Now, Lamaisa, this seems to be Nistavra. I did see some question this. Who told you have a right to make a new din on something attached to the house? But the truth is it's Nistavra, and we could also throw in like the Mechaba, it's mutter without that cheshbon of being part of the house, because this ground, this area is Merutzav. Now, Lamaisa, there's a third svara that who cares is built on top of the ground. Lamaisa, this is not ground, it's built on top of it. Every house is built on the ground. So who said you all of a sudden it becomes part of the ground? Maybe it's an independent porch, and most porches today are merutzav. That's why I think there's a makom lahakol by this sweeping this patio. But what's interesting, it comes sukkahs, and many people build their sukkahs outdoors, of course, not on an upstairs porch, but on the ground. So there's no doubt about it that sukkahs is the time you have to sweep. You have children, grandchildren, make a lot of mess. But if your sukkah is built on the karka, the Rebbeinu Shlomo's karka, that's asami dabanan to sweep that sukkah. The fact that most homes are merutzav have nothing to do with the outdoors. Outdoors is still us. Now, the only shaila is if someone puts down for sukkahs, he doesn't want to sit on the ground, it's muddy, so he puts down a top or a piece of linoleum. So even that is not so pashut, because roiv of the yard is not merutzav. So what's the tati mekom? The deck, I could say, is part of the house. The sukkah is in the backyard, the freestanding sukkah. So the chutshani taka has this tzarech. Why is it mutter? Just because you put down a karka, put down a temporary karka. So for Svardi, it's mutter because this karka is merutzav. The Shmir Shabbos in Chav Gimel Beis asas. Now that's interesting because he allows a deck because it's part of the house, but a sukkah is not part of the house. But then I saw the Archas Shabbos, or Ayin Gimel has a chiddush, and he says that since it's mishtamish fedira, it's included in the heta of a bayis, which is a hamish svara. Who said mechatesa? Why is that part of the? Isn't it part of the chotzer? So lemaisa, what's interesting would be if you allow taka the person to sweep because it's part of the house, then it comes out that this yard is also for 11 and a half months a year, and for sukkahs, when you have the ground and you have the sukkah, it's mutter, the same ground, mutter or us. But that's something to think about, that if there's no ground at all, except for the karka, avada, it's also to sweep. So lemaisa, the Atkan city life. Now let's move to the suburbs. And there the homes are, Baruch Hashem, still merutziv. But the outdoors, the lawn, the yards, the plots of land that people live on, we could probably suggest, I'm not saying all suburban areas, but there are some suburban areas that roiva area is not merutziv. You have a little bit, of course, the streets where cars drive is merutziv, and sometimes you have a thin walkway. But if you calculate the land of these places, there are many private homes that have huge acres of land. The roiv might not be merutziv. And that's why it's very possible that if you say, my city where I live is roiv ein merutz, I'm not saying Muncie or Lakewood, you have to know each area. But let's say you say, my area is roiv ein merutz, it will come out that if you have a walkway paved going up from the street to your house, fully paved, there wouldn't be a heta, unless you're a Sfardi, because that is a merutziv in a makam she'ein merutziv. And you don't say, well, the pavement leading to the house is part of the house. It's not an extension to the house. So that's an interesting chiddush where a suburban area has this issue. Now what's mavaldik, you learn halacha and you think it's not relevant, but then you think about it, everything has certain relevance. There are some outdoor areas that they don't make a whole pavement. They put down, I don't know the name officially, but they put down like thin stones, and that's formed like a walkway, especially in suburban areas, like thin stones, and you step from one to the other, and that's good enough to be outdoors. But there's earth in between the stones. And the Bialacha in Siv Beis discusses Bein HaRoivadim, in between the tiles, or the whatever might be outside, there's earth. So you have to worry about mashvugumos of that earth. You want to solidify that. So this outdated halacha, bein haroivadim, would be fully negeya when you have an outdoor pathway that has thin stones that you walk from one to the other, but there's earth in between. So even if a Svardi would want to be makeup because it's merutziv, it's really not merutziv, because part of it is still the original earth. That's the problem of mashvagumas. Now, let's say a person is either suburban area or the mountains is even more common, and there's a lawn. Now we call this, I don't know a better word, but there's a bald spot where there's no grass growing, and just dirt, and people they eat outdoors. So I should mention, the Shulchan Aruch in Shin Amud Vav Gimel is not so excited about eating outdoors. You might come to pour water, but whatever the person has a heta, whatever the heta might be. The question is, when he eats outdoors, let's say he doesn't use liquid, so there's no chashash, but he eats outdoors, and someone spilled a whole bag of popcorn on the floor. So you want to sweep up the earthen floor outdoors. That's mamish our sugya. Because even if the bungalows are all merutzafim, which they are, but the outdoors is not. So here you have a simple case. You could sweep a bald area. There's no problem. But then again, there's an issur d'Rabbanan of ein mechabdim. This is mamish our sugya. I saw Rav Sternbuch in the Tshuvas Chelik Beis Amud Kuf Pei Daled, and it's interesting how Poskim are focused on every nuance. He's speaking about Erev Pesach Shechal b'Shabbos. What does that have to do with our sugya? He says very pashut, because people are afraid to eat the sudas in the house, at least the challah, so they eat it outside in the backyard. And then, of course, you have the emergency. There's crumbs on the floor, so you get the broom. What are you sweeping outdoors? Yeah. He's worrying about crumbs, which is important. What about sweeping? This is the Rabbanan. So he says, if you want to worry about crumbs, then don't eat outside. Now the emphasis, the Shulchan Aruch was also worried about crumbs in Hilchos Pesach, and he quotes the Rush that just after you finish, just shake off all the crumbs. Perurim and meila batli. Don't worry about the crumbs; they don't count. But if you say this psak over in your house, you might get thrown out. But Lamaisa, that's what the Mechaber says. So if you want to clean the crumbs, fine, but don't eat over an area that you're not allowed to sweep. Now, a bungalow colony is typically, most of it is ein merutziv, I think. You have to know the metzias, but be careful. In the house is fine. Outside, even in a bald spot area where there's no grass growing, so sweeping is feasible, but it's still asa, as we said. Someone pointed out to me, he was sweeping, interesting idea, he swept his porch upstairs, which is part of the house. There's no shaykhs to our sugya. But I guess, I'm not sure why he does it, but he wants to just, he gets a little lazy, instead of picking up the dust, he sweeps it out onto the yard. I hope no one's under him, when he throws it out. But he says, is that a problem of mashva gumais? I said, why? If dust goes onto the ground, it levels it somewhat. Okay, I don't know how much dust he has. If he has chicken bones and he has, popcorn and that stuff, it's not going to, make a mashva gumais. But again, more seichel that you don't take dirt from here to there, and also you might hit someone. So I can't say it's the right thing to do, but it doesn't seem to be a problem of mashva gumais. What interesting is that sweeping l'chayra, as we said, should be no shiloh whatsoever. Wait, what? Oh, so muktzah is a good point. That's why one of the Rishonim hold it's also sweeping. But the heta is, even though it's not a perfect heta, that if it's graf shulri, if it's repulsive, number one. And number two, which I know you're going to argue, is we could say that this is tilta min atzad. I'm not touching the muktzah. Even though that's the derech of sweeping of dirt. But this is what the Poskim say. It's a combination of tilta min atzad, where there's a heta, perhaps a heta, but certainly a graf shulri. But enechanami, that's if someone's moving only muktzah and is moving with a broom, that's not a heta, because that would be the way of moving this type of muktzah. Now, the next thing about sweeping b'chlal, it's interesting. So a number of years ago, I heard this shaila, and I totally forgot about it. When I learned recently, I realized this is something to talk about. In one of the popular camps, they bought a few hundred old-fashioned brooms. Now, again, the young boys won't know what we're talking about, but old-fashioned brooms or old-fashioned brushes basically were made out of straw. If you went to the barber, and after he finished cutting your hair, he dutifully took an old-fashioned brush and he cleaned you off from the hair. That's made out of straw. Now, you can make a broom or a brush out of straw. So they gave out these brooms and told the boys to sweep. So one from a bach said, "Now how to use this broom? I learned in Allah, and how to use such a broom." I said, "Wait a minute, you're not allowed to use it on Friday?" Maybe he's geyser Friday after Shabbos. But is that true? You can't use such a broom on Shabbos? So raise that pella. In our sweep bays, where the Machabas are not allowed to sweep on Shabbos, there are more ads quoting Rishonim, you're not allowed to use a old-fashioned brush to clean clothing. Shalai yishabru kismeihem. Now he's not talking about sweeping. Mr. Brewer says, Hu adin. He's talking about using an old-fashioned brush that's made of these straw bristles that break. Zok Mr. Brewer, even though you're talking about there's no question of libun. For some reason, let's say the feathers. It's not dirt in the clothing itself. The concern is not libun. The question is, by cleaning, you're breaking the bristles of the brush. Now, the Mr. Brewer adds, Sif Cotton Yudalid, Hu adin, you can't sweep with this type of broom. It's made out of straw bristles. Okay? Now, the shaila is, what's wrong with breaking bristles? So Mr. Brewer says, what do you mean? You're sois a keli, you're breaking a keli. Frek the taz, tmua. And if you break it, you're only mekalkal. You're not breaking to use it. So the Magen Avram and Sif Cotton Hay says, well, it's not an Adar I, but then again, it's still an Adar Rabbanan. Soisa is also Adar Rabbanan. But the most thorough criticism of this psak, Mary Kash is printed on the page in the new Shulchan Aruch. He says some people are using these old-fashioned brooms or brushes. No one's chayish for that. Because first of all, the only issa is when it's a psik reisha. Is it a psik reisha when you sweep with an old-fashioned straw broom, it breaks? And even if you do break, it's eina mischavin. So he says you don't have to worry about using an old-fashioned broom or a brush. But lamaisa, b'nei Yisrael yoyitzim Adar I, so you're not allowed to use it. And the hezbollah could be pashut. No one's saying it's a vadei psik reisha. But you look in the Eilas Thomas Cotton Bay, says the whole sweeping is not a vadei psik reisha. What is it? Karvel psik reisha. Close enough. No? So using an old-fashioned was also karvel psik reisha. The taina, what is the issa? It's only soisa. But then again, soisa is the Rabbana. And that's why the Mishnah Berurah says it's like soisa and shouldn't be used. Now, Lamaisa, the Mishnah Berurah in Diva Maskal Shaloi, so I have another problem with using these type of brooms. Besides, he says, maybe Taki you have a taina, it's not a vadei, whatever it is. But he quotes the Bach, where the Bach says, first of all, your point, using the broom is also alt muktzah, and then the Bach adds, nereka of the dechayel. Using an old-fashioned broom is of the dechayel. Now, what does he mean? Very pashut. Because typically, an old-fashioned broom was used on dirt floors. Very much associated with malach. And also, at times, the bristles break. So in a person's mind, he's doing something wrong. Either it's asa, or he might bring to issa. So the Bach says you can't use a old-fashioned broom out of the chayil. The Chazon Ish, and this is typical Chazon Ish in Siman Nun, Sif Cotton Hay, he asks, what's the issa of breaking a broom when you break a bristle? So up to Chazon Ish in his beautiful language, he says, I don't understand what's size about it. Kol tzuras hakli kayemes. You didn't break the broom. You broke off one of the 237 bristles. So nothing happened to the broom. It's like someone said, I can't walk the shul on Shabbos because I'm wearing out my shoe. So it's a shoe. Is it nikah? Is it something broken? So Chazon Ish felt that it's not soisa because the broom is still functional. So what then is it issa? Zilzul Shabbos. Using this type of broom is zilzul Shabbos. So we see a new factor to consider. Even if it's not asa mitzad mashvegumais, because you're talking about a house that's merutza, but there's something called zilzul Shabbos. Now, lemaisa, our brooms today, you don't even see any longer these old-fashioned brooms, are made of synthetic, that are durable, they don't break. So the chayra, there is no issa of using a broom today indoors. I should mention, that bacha had a point. Because to use these brooms that they gave out in camp on Shabbos, even in the bungalows even in the bungalows or the bunkhouses that are all merutzif, is still asa. That's the Ramah. That's the Bach. That's whatever the reason is, but it's still asa. But the point is that these bristles, if they break, we have a Ramah. There are some that are Mekel, but we follow the Ramah. But certainly sweeping Erev Shabbos, there's no Chashash. So if someone doesn't want to sweep, he has to find a better excuse. That's not the excuse. But you might have one last possibility for a good excuse. And that is a Chiddush of the Bialacha. Bialacha says this twice, but not clearly. I want to make a point. You learn Be'in, you'll see what I mean. Bialacha in Dimasa Shala Yishtabru, he brings the Bach that sweeping could be over the Chayil. Then in earlier, in Dimas Chalakalim, he says, therefore, since sweeping might involve over the Chayil, it kedai to have a special broom l'kavod Shabbos. He doesn't spell that out, but he says the problem is sweeping might involve the over the Chayil aspect. Now we find in Shin Chav Zayin Gimel regarding a certain type of scratcher that even though there's no malacha, but it's still over the Chayil, and Dr. Mishtabura, you have to have a special scratcher l'kavod Shabbos. Now, if you have something designated l'kavod Shabbos, it takes away the Zilzul Shabbos, the over the Chayil. So the Bialacha implies, again, you look inside, it's not Meferish, but he implies, and the Mizalman and Shulchan Shleim, Shin Chav Zayin Hey, and Rabbi Yashav and Ashrei Yish, the end of Perik Lamed Gimel spelled this out, that if indeed the problem of the Chayil and sweeping, you have to have a special Shabbos broom that you designate for Shabbos. It doesn't have to be dramatically different, but it has to be meyuchad, based on Shin Chav Zayin Gimel. Now, Lamaisa, there are some that have a special Shabbos broom, and Tavei Alei and Bracha. But the MS is, most never heard of this, and I can understand why. Because the Bach, or the Bialacha even, in their time, certainly the Bach's times, sweeping was more often asa than not. Because sweeping meant sweeping a floor, like the Chavetz Chaim's floor was still an earthen floor. So sweeping was almost synonymous with malacha. That's over the Chayil. Using a typical broom, which had made of straw that broke, is also asa. So this is a classic over the Chayil. Whether the over the Chayil is, you might think it's asa, or you might come to do an issa, but sweeping had two reasons why it was synonymous with malacha. But in Tavshin Pei Beis, you're not going to find an earthen floor, and you're not going to find a old-fashioned broom. So the Ksais HaShulchan and Kuf Mem Vav Nun Vav and Nun Zayin, and Rav Moshe's quote is saying the same thing, that our brooms in our homes are not over the Chayil. It's a totally benign activity, not the house and not the broom. So although, and the truth is, the Bialach himself writes in the Masla Kalim, in Abayis Hayim Merutziv, Yesh Lismoich. So I want to say, Rabbi Bialach is called, you have to have a special broom l'kavod Shabbos. Look at the Lashon, it's not so compelling as people say it is. But if someone does it, Tavei Alei and Bracha. So certainly, if you're asked to sweep and you don't have a special Shabbos broom, I would sweep, and Shalom Bayis is doicha this special chumrah. But again, using something that's over the Chayil, that's taka problem. I'll give you a mush. Where is over the Chayil in our times? The Minchas Yitzchak Chayil Gimel Memhei and the Shever Levi Dal Reish Ayin Tes both say that brushing teeth with a toothbrush involves schita, whether you use water or toothpaste might be memachik. Let's say you very much want to brush your teeth, so take a toothbrush, don't add water, and brush your teeth. But they say that you have to have a special Shabbos toothbrush. That I very much understand, because toothpaste, the toothbrush, brushing teeth is always a malacha, still is. You found a chiddush without toothpaste and water. But the act is an act that too closely resembles malacha. So then you have to have a special toothbrush. Das verstehe ich. But sweeping in our times is not close to malacha. So again, if someone wants to have a special a broom l'kavod Shabbos, Tavei Alei bracha. A toothbrush is a better idea. In fact, someone told me they're even selling special Shabbos toothbrushes. But lav dafka, you have to buy them, dafka. But they have something special l'kavod Shabbos. Now let's discuss shoveling snow on Shabbos. Yomtov usually there's no snow, but Shabbos certainly there is. So the emes is within an Erev, no problem of carrying. What should be the problem? So Lamaisa, part of a different shir, but we discussed this once, that people think snow is muktzah. It's not true. Mr. Bur and Shin Lamed Chesiv Katan Lamed says that rain, even though it fell from Shemayim, is not noil, is not muktzah. The Shmir Shabbos, quoting of Shalom Zalman and Tezayin Kuf Yud Ches, says that snow is also not muktzah. The fact that it became snow when it fell, but it's not enough of a noila. Moshe's quote is saying in one place that snow is muktzah, but most poskim say clearly that rain or snow is not muktzah. Now, assuming that's, of course, correct, so what's wrong with shoveling? You're not carrying, you're an Erev, you're moving snow, but snow is not muktzah. So here we come to an interesting point. Because let's say you're living in a suburban area, you're living in Muncie, and you have a walkway to your house, to the shul, and you want to shovel that. So let's think. Can you sweep that area? Assuming we say that this outdoor area in a suburban area is Roiv Einem Erutzah, and you can't sweep this same walkway, so how could you shovel? The Issa is not sweeping per se. We'll soon see even mopping floors also. Even putting wood on the floor. It's treating the ground because you're coming to level it. So sweeping with a broom is mashmugumais, and shoveling with a shovel is the same concern. And that's why it's pashut, and Tak I saw the Machzal Yo points this out, and Simon Samach Ches, Rav Strasser in the Sefer Shabbos Shabbat, Amid Reitzad the Gimel says this as well, that shoveling in a place you can't sweep has the same issue like sweeping. Now, in New York City, that you're allowed to sweep the outdoors, so you're allowed to shovel. But in a place that you can't sweep that area, shoveling is within the same treatment of ground like sweeping and washing floors and adding water. Now, the emes of the Makar Chaim, the Chavos Yor, a few hundred years ago, in Shin Chav, Sif Yud Aleph, he said you have to be moicha when children play and throw snowballs, but the fanes hashelig min haderech umin hachaloin is mutter. So I don't know what he means. You're allowed to clear the snow from the derech. It's hard to know because the chaloin means a window. Well, that's merutziv. But if he means derech, we're in a city that's roiv einay merutziv, and this is a tzat mekel even einay merutziv, unless he's going to mechaber shita, because then once merutziv is mutter. But definitely the poskim seem to assume that if the place you can't sweep, you can't shovel as well. Now, both the Machzal Yo and the Shabbos Shabbat, they point out that initially, stam to shovel on Shabbos would be a zilzal Shabbos. It's just not becoming for Shabbos. But, as the Shabbos Shabbat points out, if you leave the snow and someone trips in it, a younger person, certainly an older person, is a chashash of sakana. So, avada, miyikir din, if it's long within the area, you're allowed to sweep, and that wouldn't be a problem. How could you be makel machmir in zilzal Shabbos, and when someone comes to shul, he's going to trip, a person that an older person especially, that falls, it could be a 6 months rehabilitation. So he's makel the makom that you have concern of people tripping. Now, to call a guy is a better option, because Adi Akum, we don't have to worry so much about this concern. Now, the big question is washing floors on Shabbos. So as I told you earlier, we're talking now about pouring water with a sponger, not mops. So this is two Gemaras. One is a Mishnah, actually. Psachim Samach Dalet, they didn't wash the floor in the Beis HaMikdash, even though it was a bloody mess, quote unquote. And Shabbos Kufnan Alfma Beis, they didn't wash the floor in a Merchatz. And Taka, that's why the Rambam in Chaf Aleph Gimel, followed by the Shulchan Aruch in Shin Lamed Zayin Gimel, and I quote the Mechaber's Lashon, which is Kemat Lashon of the Rambam. And listen closely, you're going to find something very surprising. Ein Sachen es akarka, v'lamadicha noise afilu merutza. This is the Rambam, paskin by the Mechaber. You can't wash the floor on Shabbos, even if you have tiled or stone or shayish or marble floor. Now that's called a double steer, because we just learned a few minutes ago that the Mechaber, that the Rambam and the Mechaber hold you allowed to sweep if it's merutziv, the next sif, and in the Rambam it's the same halacha, but washing the floor is also merutziv. Why? And the Pais can say even if the whole city is merutziv is also. What's tutzach? Zok the Magen Mishnah, half a line, he asked this kasha. That what I think it means to say, and this is an important point, our attitude is we keep takanas chazal blindly, or better yet, with emunah. We don't ask questions. It's us, it's us. Now, lemaisa, if you have two factors, number one, the Gemara says merutzif is mutter, the story of Ameimar, and the whole city is merutzif. So you could say your city is mufk from the yis. But we don't just ignore takanas chazal. So when we find in the Gemara that merutziv is mutter, like sweeping, a meimar, so it's mutter. But when the Gemara speaks in the Beis Hamikdash, or in the Gemara about the merchatz, there's no mention of merutziv being mutter. If I can't, the Beis Hamikdash was merutziv. So therefore, zokt the Magid Mishnah, logic dictates, don't tamper with Kakanas Chazal. You'll say, but I have to. And the Beis Hamikdash didn't have to. It was blood all over the floor. In other words, the starting point is we have to be Shemesh Shabbos, keep Takanas Chazal without making cheshbonos. No, vos, if the Gemara says there's a heta of kol abai kol merutziv, that's fine. But it doesn't say that by hadacha. And that's why Lamaisa, the Rambam and Mechaba, who are makel sweeping, but washing floors is categorically us. The Mishnah Berurah quotes Rabbeinu Yeruchim, another svara, that washing floors is more involved with yipui karka. Once you're being miyapa the karka, you might come to do other repairs, which is, in other words, sweeping is not as serious as mopping. But at the end of the day, this special point is that not always are we makel by kol merutziv. I'll give you a wonderful example. I thought it takes a shulchan. It tells the suit. In Shinam al-Ches Sif Hey, there's an issa based on a Gemara about rolling nuts on the ground, because you might end up to flatten out the ground, and that's also even if the whole city is merutziv. Why? Sweeping is mutter. You could live without rolling nuts, but you can't live without sweeping the floor. Now you'll ask me why when we grew up in Borough Park in Williamsburg, I saw both. We rolled nuts on Pesach. So the Ramah says you let the mutter shishayim al yimazidin. And we have to do a little true about that one, but it doesn't justify it. Rolling nuts is the issa is out mash v'gumais, right? But since you can live without it, there's no have to even call it a merutziv. That's similar to madichin. But sweeping, that soyrech is mutter. And this certainly explains why the minig was throughout the dayers that washing floors was much more chama. Now, is there a heta? So, l'mashal, in a hospital, from a hospital, a camp, and during the summer it's a balagan at night, and soup spilled and cholent spilled, and there's flies, and you have to wash the floor. So I'm talking now not about mopping, I'm talking about medichin. So the Shmir Shabbos Chav Gimel Vav, or let's see him in Gimel Ches, make an interesting observation. Since the only reason why mopping is also is like the Magmish says, because there's no tzairich. So if I tell you there is a tzairich, so you're back to the heta. So these Gedolei Yisrael have said, Aruch HaShabbos also says this, that if there's a tzairich, so you're back to square one, that it's like sweeping. So washing floor is also period, even kol merutziv. If you could say it's a real tzairich, it's mutter to wash a floor with spraying the water and then using a sponge. Now, the Marzal Yo in Chelik Aleph, Ayin Beis, is a very thorough criticism of this psak. He speaks about he was asked by a farmer that has a milk on the floor where the cows are, and there's a chashash taking a trip, and a real tzairich. And his main point is that if there's a concern you might come to do malacha, you're not making a makam tzairich. If something looks like malacha, then you can be makel. But if something that's going to bring to malacha, something that's over the chol zilzul Shabbos, he writes very emphatically that there's no heta, even b'makam tzairich to wash the floor that doesn't involve schita. He says, what should the farmer do? That is a problem. So have a guy wash the floor, spray water. But again, this question: can a yid take a hose? No malacha. Spray water on the kitchen floor b'makam tzairich is machlokes of our Gedolei HaPoskim. Now, l'maisa, what's interesting is that really there's a beautiful time to be makel, because why is it asa to sweep? The worst scenario, sweep an earthen floor. I'm not doing anything wrong. It's not a malacha, but sikreisha mash v'gumais. If you look at the end of Reish Nun Gimel, the Ramah says that even though for you to do a certain act is asa al sikreisha, but the act of sikreisha is mutter. And the Rav explained, because he's not, you tell him to do a heta and issa comes out, or the dibur, or whatever the heta is. But what's also for yid psik reisha is mutter to tell a guy to do. So it's a beautiful Ramah l'shitasa here, because the Ramah here says, even though you can't sweep the floor or do any of these isurim, aidiakim is mutter. Why is mutter aidiakim? Because Shikreisha Ba'akum is mutter. So that's why Lamaisa, washing the floor, Aidi Akum, would be mutter Makam Tzairich, like a regular Shvus to Shvus. The Ramos says that by us and Siv Beis regarding the sweeping, but who had in this floor? Now, Lamaisa, using a mop is certainly much worse. Because that's schita. Telling the guy to mop the floor means you're making schita, multiple schitas. The only thing is, there's one of the earlier Paiskim quoted by the Heintika Paiskim, and that was the Oile Yakov, was asked why people wash the floor with they tell the guy to wash with a mop. So his yisoid is, you tell them to wash the floor. They could put water on the floor and they could use their hands or whatever. If it's feasible to wash the floor without using a mop and making schita, adaita de nafshi. Okay, good luck. That you have to know the metzias. But one thing I will say, that having a guy wash the floor with the old-fashioned or the modern way of using a sponge and a water, that l'chayr be mutter in this particular case. Question: if there's a lot of water spilled on the kitchen, can you just push it out with the wiper, whatever you have, and push it into the ground, in the drain? So that I saw even the Machzor Leyo and Ayin Aleph Zayin, who was very machmir, but that's okay. You're not washing before you're getting rid of the water. A tricky question is, can you spot clean a floor? There's a little stain that's nasty, and you want to clean that. It's not covered Shabbos. So mitzad echad, it's only a small area. I'm not washing the floor. But mitzad sheni, we would say zil basatayma. What's the problem? You're cleaning the floor. Who cares, a little bit or a lot? So the only thing I was thinking is, regarding Chalamoyed, or 9 days with an issa of kibbutz, the place you're allowed to make spot cleaning. It's not considered kibbutz. So maybe here also is not considered washing the floor. And I'm not sure that's his svar, but Shmir Shabbos quotes of Shlomo Zalman and Chav Gimel Lamed, or Tzion Mem Gimel Ches. They both say spot cleaning a kitchen floor, of course without schita, you're not using a sponge or a mop, is okay. The ein al zeh shem hadocha. But the emes is, there's a big makam l'chalik, because there it's totally in the issa of washing. So laundering is asa, spot cleaning is not asa. But here, zil basa time, the issa is you're getting on your hands and knees, you're cleaning the floor, you're treating the floor, and that's where the Machzor Leyo and Amud Reish Tezayin rejects this heta. He says it's not a heta, you're washing the floor. Mali kat lekul, mali kat lepalga. It's still you're doing enough of the problem that we're concerned about. Now this is easier said than done. If a person has, let's say a child, left soya, whatever, or meraglayim on the floor, so then the makam tzarech, you can rely on these sheetas, that part of it is okay. But again, the point is that but there's a very nasty stain, a 2-day, 3-day Yomtov. So what I would say, what the Chazon Ish once said, when someone asked him, he brought a hat, and the hat fell in the mud, and it was dirty. Could I clean this on Shabbos? The Chazon Ish said, such a beautiful covered Shabbos hat. The greatest covered Shabbos is to keep Shabbos. So I think Yidden throughout the Dairis, and especially, in our times also, after a 2 or 3 day Yomtov, the floor is dirty, so that's covered Shabbos. Don't worry. Okay, just don't invite the mechut until after Yomtov. Shouldn't see the floor. Now, a few quick questions I wanted to mention about a carpet cleaner. It's outdated in a certain sense, in and out. But the kitchen, a carpet cleaner, besides the problem of malabin, because it cleans the carpet, which is a beged, and it gets into the fibers, some of them pull out some of the fibers of the carpeting, and says the Chelkas Yakov, or Chaim Kuf Samach, that's our sugya of using an old-fashioned broom. Mali breaking the broom, or Mali breaking the carpet. Okay, others say it's also of the Dechayel, Lamaisa, Minchas Yitzchak, Machzor Leyo, and Shagamei all say we don't use a carpet sweep on Shabbos. Now, someone asked about washing a dirty countertop. He heard epis, it's awesome. So this is a beautiful shayla, and I appreciate the question because it led me to a beautiful point. Because Lamaisa, the Lamda might say, if you're not allowed to wash the ground, and the countertop is mechubal karka, and has din of a karka, maybe you can't wash the countertop. But then again, zil basatayma works lahakal. The issa, really, there's no problem in washing a tiled floor. What are you going to do wrong? But since many floors either used to or still have dirt, so washing a floor is also atu karkrenim rutzefes. I've never seen a countertop made of dirt. So the whole chashash doesn't apply. I am hilchas lomdis, it's din kakarka, that's tumah, but not lagabi our sugya. And I think that's what Rav Vosner in Chelik Yud Aleph Siman Samach Zayim means to say, and he rejects this as a toyis in this shayla. Now, somebody asked, can I use a cleanser? As long as it's no memareyach, it's not a substance. You could use a liquid, even bleach, Ajax, those things, they're not muktzah because you could use them when you need it. Okay, polishing furniture, cleaning windows is considered uvda dechoyel because that's done usually before Shabbos, but cleaning a countertop is fine. But last but not least, and this really is a good way to end the sugya because it has a lot of our points, but it brings out us Saif Master Machshavat Tchila. The Minchas Yitzchak, Groise Minchas Yitzchak in Chelik Hey, had the following question. He was really asked about a basic kisi that was stuffed, and you use a plunger to clear it. So he asked parenthetically, but he didn't put it in parentheses. He says, no one's going to ask this question, but I'm asking it anyhow. Why is it mutter b'chlal to flush? Since the basic kisi is part of the ground, why is that including the issue of emadich and karka? So he says, it can't be because it's loyal das it's also, but why not? He says, it's material, it's whatever it's made out of, but it's not the earth. But Beis Hamikdash echiach. Beis Hamikdash was made, the floor was made of shayish, and it still was also to wash. So his teretz, his music now is, since the Magen Mish says the only reason it's also to wash a non-earthen floor is because there's no tzayrech. So this there is a tzayrech. So he's using the het of the Magen Mishnah in a Beis HaKisei. But Lania's diet, I think it's even more partial, we could say, and that is basically that there was never a basic kisei invented that's made out of earth. So just like a countertop is mutter l'chatchila without a suffix, here also. And I saw the Megillah Seif and Siman Yud Gimel, the end of Sikot Hey, he says like more lumdish. The fact that it's karkol agabi halacha doesn't have impact this sugya about gezeira. But I think what it means to say is that it has to be a chash that you might come to mashvagumais. There's no way in the world mashvagumais in a Beis HaKisei. But what I thought was beautiful is you see Takanas Chazal have to be accounted for. We don't just make it kulais, everything, even this has to be understood. Why? I couldn't talk to you all.
Shem Irgen Shir, like a big Yashakach, or Smith for today's shir. As a Shem after Mincha, Smith will say a seekum of the shir. Pananya ben Akash Shem, Rotzak Rishboch, the Zakes is Yisrael. Figure Hebron Tire Mitzvah Shenema, like no Chofetz, a man Sidka, Yagdol Tire V'yader.